Okay, hello everybody. I believe you can hear me. Hopefully you can. If not, I'm sure I will be informed of that shortly. My name is Mike Kallenberger. I'm with Tropos Brand Consulting. A little bit on my background. I've been in the beer business doing consumer insights and brand strategy for about over 30 years now. I spent 2 decades doing that at Miller Brewing Company, then Miller Coors, and for the last 10 years, I've been an independent consultant working with small and smaller breweries on things like brand positioning and just helping them know their drinkers better than they know themselves. So I want to thank everybody for joining me right now, and I want to thank Andrew and the group for having me. I hope you'll find it informative, and certainly at the end we'll have time for some questions. So first, some background and premises. I've always believed the key to positioning your brand is knowing how to frame your brand story with your drinkers' motivations in mind. There's a lot of ways to tell a brand story. All of them are true, but all of them are emphasizing different aspects of what's important about your brand, your attitudes and your values, and really emphasizing the attitudes and values that are going to align with your drinkers' motivations is a key to the whole process. Today's presentation is going to make use of a lot of data from our partners at Kantar and their annual monitor survey. For those of you who may not be familiar with them, you may have known them under their old name, Yankelovich. They've been running the Yankelovich monitor since the 1960s. It's similar to the Gallup poll or the Harris poll, if you've heard of those. It's an annual survey of thousands of Americans learning all about their attitudes and values, and also which product categories they use. So you can slice and dice the data in terms of different groups of people. So we can look at attitudes and values in terms of people who drink different beverages, or attitudes and values of people in different demographic groups, including generations. And understanding different generations is an important key to what I do, and I think you'll find some valuable information here on that today as well. I will say, though, that while these insights are really valuable, survey data really can barely scratch the surface of learning human motivations. So a little bit of background on this. I have always felt, and this is a big part of what I do for clients, is the best approach to understanding drinkers' motivations is really face-to-face interviews in the brew pub or tap room. Get to know them as people, do it in an environment that's really puts people in a beer frame of mind, and these conversations can be 45 minutes to an hour. You can't really do that in a survey. One caveat or one caution, though, you can't always ask people directly, because if you ask someone why they make the choices they do, they will give you an answer and they will believe it. But at best, that'll be incomplete, and at worst, a rationalization. I always advise people the best way to learn about someone's attitudes is encourage them to tell stories. Tell me a story about the last time you were drinking beer with friends, or a really memorable time when you were drinking beer with friends, or even a story about life. By listening to how they tell that story, how they frame that story. What are the points they emphasize? What are the points where they seem to have a little bit more of a smile on their face, or there's a little bit more enthusiasm? That really gives you a lot of insights into their real motivations. And so that's I would encourage people to take that approach. I think it's the best way to sort of learn about your drinkers. However, today we don't have that luxury. We have a more practical approach, which is the monitor data. And this is a very useful framework for interpreting results. There are basically 4 basic human. I actually have a note saying that my audio is a little staticky. Maybe I should turn down, or actually, maybe there's some feedback here. So if I turn off my audio, maybe that'll help. All right. I put the earphones in, so that might address that problem. All right, so anyway, this is a very useful framework I use for interpreting results. It's the 4 basic human motivations. If you've ever had a psychology class, you might recognize Maslow's needs hierarchy. But classifying people into one of 4 groups, whether their primary motivation is stability, community, mastery, or growth, is a really good way to do this. And within each of these groups, there's sort of groupings of sub-motivations. For example, in stability, you'll see things like safety control and self-discipline, etc. Don't worry if this is a pretty new concept and you're not getting your head around it quickly, because as we go through this, you'll be I think gaining more insight into what this means and doesn't mean. So as far as key findings from the Kantar survey, if you look at just weekly alcoholic beverage drinkers, there's some overlap in the drinker bases between craft beer and hard seltzer. But as a still developing category, hard seltzer has a bigger upside. So, for example, 32% of all alcoholic beverage drinkers drink craft beer weekly, and only craft beer, not hard seltzer. Another 5% drink hard seltzer weekly, but 11% drink both weekly. So that's the overlap in the two drinker bases. But you still got 52% of alcoholic beverage drinkers who don't drink either one. Now, craft beer's been around for a long time, so I would tell you that if craft beer were going to get more of those folks, they would have done it by now. Whereas hard seltzer, being a new category, still has a lot of upside. A lot of those 52% might be potential drinkers for hard seltzer. All right, so we take those four sets of values: stability, community, mastery, and growth, and I've also thrown in a miscellaneous here. We're going to talk about different drinker groups in terms of how they play out with these different values, but you can see within each group, stability, we're going to ask about their safety, how much they're motivated by safety, control, and self-discipline. In community, it's relationships, belonging, and connection. In mastery, we have ambition, excellence, and challenging authority. In growth, there's self-expression, adaptability, and agency. Agency just means believing that you have ability to affect the world around you. And then in miscellaneous, we have excitement, health, and looking fit. And so basically, plus or minus 2 percentage points is the cutoff for a meaningful differentiation here. So let's look at wine drinkers, not because we're really interested in talking about wine drinkers per se today, but this is a good way to illustrate how this works, because wine drinkers have the most pronounced values of any category we looked at. They are clearly motivated by safety. If you look at the bottom left, you can see safety is one of the higher bars for them. They're motivated by all three sets of values under community: relationships, belonging, and connection, and health. Wine has a strong association with health benefits, and there's a huge degree of motivation by health benefits among wine drinkers. But they're not motivated by mastery, where you can see all three of those sub-motivations under mastery are negative, and they're not motivated by excitement, which might be not be surprising if you know any wine drinkers, or you are a wine drinker. Likewise, we have big imported beer as one grouping. I think these are not surprising. They are motivated by stability and not motivated by challenging authority. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Big beer has been sort of I don't want to call it the past. It's still huge, but it's been declining. And people who seek safety and self-discipline and are not interested in challenging authority are going to stick with the tried and true and what's comfortable. And that's really what big beer is all about these days. Now we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into craft beer and what I'm calling craft beer's dilemma. Craft beer, and this is not a good thing at all, this is a big concern I'm going to talk about. It has the most flatlined profile of any alcoholic beverage category. It does not reach plus or minus 2% on any one of these motivations. And that's a big cause for concern. You have to stand for something, and to be an effective, powerful brand. And as a category, right now, craft beer doesn't seem to stand for anything that draws people motivated by any of these different factors we looked at. And this has not always been the case. Based on all those face-to-face interviews I've done over the years, we're talking hundreds, maybe even 1,000 by now, craft beer really has historically had a lot of appeal to people motivated by mastery and growth. If you look at the bar charts down at the bottom, mainstream big beer brands, their motivational appeal is dominated by things in the community bucket. But if you look at the red bars, craft beer has certainly had some appeal to community, but also to mastery and growth. But we're not seeing that right now in this most recent data, and that's a big concern for me. I think that, and I would argue, I have been a critic of the fact that craft beer as a whole, it's gaining a lot of new drinkers in the past 5 years, but I think it may be doing that by diluting rather than broadening its brand meaning. If you look in the 2015 data, 11% of all alcohol drinkers drank craft beer weekly. In 2020, it's 17.7%. So that's in and of itself a great thing. Obviously, having more drinkers is a nice thing, but it's a big challenge for any brand, whether it's an individual beer brand or a craft brand, the category as a whole. People try to broaden the meanings of their brand, and it's a really hard thing to do. You often wind up diluting it rather than broadening it. I honestly believe that's what's going to happen with craft beer. And I think this might be a primary reason craft beer as a category has struggled to grow in recent years. If you had extrapolated the trend for craft beer's growth in 2014, it would have looked like that top line, and we would have been at about 16% market share last year. The actual market share was 13%. It's been growing, but not at the rate we would have anticipated 3 years ago. This is an article of mine that was in the New Brewer last fall, and I raised the question then, are craft beers still innovating? In the world of marketing, we talk about two kinds of innovation. One is what I would call, for lack of a better name, true innovation, and the other is copycat innovation. And I try to be fair to both sides in this article, but my basic argument was that we're seeing a lot more copycat innovation, and that's not really good for the category as a whole. It's probably good for the individual brands because they're getting a lot of volume, but here's the concern. This quote at the top, this is from a guy named Peter Drucker, who I have a great deal of respect for. He's a very bright guy. He was the founder of modern management theory, wrote a lot of books on management and marketing, and this quote from him I think is really compelling. Because the purpose of business is to create a customer, the business enterprise has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. Marketing and innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. Marketing is the distinguishing, unique function of the business. Now, if you look back over the past 40 years of craft beer's existence, not a lot of marketing was going on. Craft brewers have basically been kind of resistant to marketing, but there's certainly a lot of innovation going on. And if Peter Drucker is right, it's that innovation then that has created all the customers that craft beer has today. And if you think about it, that does make a certain sense. Craft beer as a category has always been known for innovation. Now, let's take a side turn for a minute here. Let's compare some of this to what we're seeing about hard seltzer, which I would tell you is a category that's in the right place at the right time. Here's hard seltzer's profile in terms of attitudes and motivations. You know, a lot of people talk about the health aspect of hard seltzer and how it's a big part of its appeal. That may be true for a segment of the hard seltzer drinker base, but it's not really showing up in this data. Actually, you know, the degree of motivation by health for this data is -4%. But looking fit is something that is important to hard seltzer drinkers, and I think that might be what's going on here. For a lot of them, it's not so much about health as we traditionally define it, but looking fit. Now, what is also hugely associated with is excitement, as you can see on the right there. And if you look in the left, it's certainly not about stability. Negative degree of motivation by things like safety, control, or self-discipline. Now, what we also look at, I compared the sort of this profile of the motivations of different beverage groups with different demographic groups and different generations. And what I found making all these comparisons is that no beverage's values better align with any generation's values than hard seltzer aligns with millennials. And millennials are currently 24 to 41. But you can see those two lines track each other pretty closely as you go from left to right across this spectrum of motivations. Hard seltzer is also a fairly good fit with Gen Z. You may have heard a lot about Gen Z. You're going to hear a little bit more shortly. Currently, adult Gen Z is 21 to 23 years old, but there's a lot more coming in the next few years as more and more of their members turn 21. And you can see there's a somewhat of a decent fit here, not nearly as good as the fit with millennial values. But what's critically important, I think, if you look on the right, the bar charts here, Gen Z and millennials are both very motivated by excitement. And hard seltzer is the only beverage category, alcoholic beverage category, that has any degree of association with excitement. And I think this is really a big part of the reason that hard seltzer is doing so well right now. It's sort of got some unique offerings, some unique benefits in terms of the excitement it's associated with, and that's important to two generations here. Nobody else is providing that. And I don't know if you're familiar with some of the things like the online videos that hard seltzer fans and White Claw fans and others post, but there's a among a subsegment of hard seltzer drinkers, there's a certain, for lack of a better word, rowdiness that's associated with it, and I think that's actually become a big part of its selling point for at least a subsegment of those drinkers. Now, as far as the two generations, millennials are driving hard seltzer sales now, but the future is going to belong to Gen Z. If you look on the left, this is the breakdown of all alcoholic beverage drinkers in terms of their generation, which, the volume from each generation. You can see Gen Z, because adult Gen Zers are a fairly small group right now. They're less than 5% of all alcoholic beverage drinkers. Millennials are close to 40%. But if you look at the hard seltzer drinker base on the right, Gen Z is producing over twice their fair share of hard seltzer drinkers. About 12% of all hard seltzer drinkers are Gen Z, compared to it's about 6% of all alcohol drinkers. Millennials are getting 160% of their fair share, and even Gen Xers are about 90% of their fair share. You really don't see any boomers or matures who are drinking hard seltzer all right now. There's a few in the database, but they're just a tiny percentage. So these are the three generations that are driving the sales. But as we go forward, as more and more Gen Zers turn 21, they're going to start to dominate this category. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Gen Z. I've done a fair amount of research on this generation. And again, here's what they look like as the share of the adult population over the next 5 to 10 years. And you can see they're growing dramatically. They're going to be well over 20% of the adult population by 2030. And other groups, by definition, will be shrinking slightly as a share of the adult population. So it's always the young adult generation that's going to be driving growth as you go forward in any category, and also driving most of the trends. So it's important to pay attention to Gen Z. They are really the future for all practical purposes. And they're just a little different. I've been studying generations for a long time, and what I tell people, this is very true. The cutoff points between different generations, so for example, right now, 23-year-olds are Gen Z, 24-year-olds are the last wave of millennials. You wouldn't think there'd be dramatic cutoffs, and there always a dramatic cutoff, but sometimes there are. When you look at some of the survey data about attitudes and values, the oldest Gen Zers can be very different from millennials who are even just a few years older. And this is one of the most compelling statistics I've ever seen from the Kantar monitor. In the year 2000, they looked at 12 to 19-year-olds in their survey, and they asked them to agree or disagree with the statement, "We're about fun." 50% of millennials in the year 2000, teenage millennials in the year 2000, said, "Yeah, we're about fun." They asked the same question of 12 to 19-year-old Gen Zers in 2016. Only 17% said we're about fun. To me, that's incredible, to have a group of teenagers who don't see themselves as being about fun. This is a generation that tends to take life somewhat seriously. And if you think about it, I could spend probably half an hour just on this chart alone, but I'll go over it fairly quickly. A lot of the attitudes of any generation have to do with their formative experiences. That's not surprising. And if you think about what was going on when millennials were growing up, one of the things I like to talk about here is sort of what's their first exposure to the outer world. Kids don't really watch the news, but they pick up things on the news and what their parents are talking about. And kind of what's going on in the world in a big general way. And when millennials were young, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, and there was this sense that the world was becoming a better place, a more optimistic place. And in terms of economics, the tech boom was going on. So again, it was really a sort of prosperous time, and it produced a generation that was fairly optimistic coming into young adulthood. With Gen Z, their first exposure to the outer world was terrorism and war, 9/11, and all the aftermath of that. And they experienced the Great Recession as kids. Millennials were basically young adults by the time the Great Recession hit, so it really didn't. It influenced them certainly, but it didn't form their basic opinions. So really, where millennials were very optimistic at this stage in their life, Gen Z is not exactly pessimistic, but cautious, and figuring that the world is not going to be quite the wonderful place that millennials thought it was going to be when they were the same age. And even their school experience, millennials grew up in an age when kids were getting more and more homework. There's actually data that shows that as teenagers, millennials had far less free time and free play time than any previous generation. Their parents' generation worked them kind of hard in school. What is Gen Z experiencing in school? They have active shooter drills, lockdown drills to practice for in case a shooter enters the school. And now they're dealing with the pandemic and online learning. So it's really, again, it's a situation where millennials grew up with this sort of an attitude of optimism. Gen Z is growing up with this very concerned attitude, and it makes them very different in a lot of ways. All right, moving on. Now, this is a chart. When I first saw this, I checked it a couple times to make sure it was correct, because this blew my mind. Ever since I've been in the beer business, which is a long time, if you charted the incidence of alcohol consumption by age, in other words, what percent of all adults drink alcohol at least once a week, you always get a line that starts high on the left with the younger people, and as you go to the right, declines. Young adults simply, they're more likely to drink alcohol than older people, and you see this incrementally as you go from left to right, typically in any one of these charts. Gen Z is the first generation I'm aware of where they're less likely to drink alcohol than millennials a few years older. To me, this is absolutely unprecedented. It's really kind of stunning, and in some ways, I'm still trying to get my head around it, the implications. Also, in the Kantar survey, people were asked, which of these products is in or on the way in? If you talk to millennials, Gen Xers or boomers, and ask them about beer, liquor, and wine, but 80% say, yeah, those are all in. Gen Z, it's only about 2/3. They're less likely than older generations to see alcoholic beverages as in. And now this is not incidence, this is what we call penetration. It's the percent of alcoholic beverage drinkers who drink each beverage at least weekly. The black line is hard seltzer. The line on top, on a little colored line, I think that might be greenish, but I'm not even sure. That's craft beer. You can see the gap between the likelihood of drinking hard seltzer and the likelihood of drinking craft beer is pretty small for adult Gen Z. And again, hard seltzer is a new category. That black line is probably going to rise over time as we go forward. But yet, even right now, there's only an 11-point gap between the likelihood of drinking hard seltzer and the likelihood of drinking craft beer among Gen Z, whereas it's a 31-point gap among millennials. And I'm running a little low on time here. It's almost time to start question and answer, so let me just crank out some final thoughts. I really do believe, and I don't want to be too much of a curmudgeon here, but I feel like I have to be, craft beer might have driven short-term growth over the last few years by sacrificing part of its reason for being. And I do believe true innovation, not just copycat innovation, is a big part of what drove craft beer's growth over the decades. And this is not just because of the innovative beers themselves. They're not that big. You know, if you go to the extreme, like a Goose Island Bourbon County Stout, that's a tiny, tiny percent of the volume. And I don't even know how profitable it is. But its innovation is a brand value. I believe craft beer attracted the kind of people who enjoyed innovation as a brand value, people who are more exploratory, who are more curious, who are more into creativity. Now, it's certainly not the responsibility of any one brewer to innovate for the sake of category growth, but at the same time, that might be a key to your own future, because even if those innovative beers aren't profitable in and of themselves, I believe they'll help build your brand and help create profits for your other beers. And you'll sell more of your other beers because you'll be associated with the brand values that innovation associates you with. Also, craft beer and craft brewers are going to succeed by being cognizant of Gen Z's attitudes and values. This is the profile of Gen Z's attitudes and values. Ambition, besides excitement, which we saw when we talked about hard seltzer, ambition and excellence are hugely important values to Gen Z. Self-expression is big as well, and even relationships. They look small compared to some of these other bars on the chart, but that's about 3% for relationships. So all these things, relationships, ambition, excellence, and self-expression, are motivations very relevant to Gen Z. I don't know that a lot of brands or a lot of beverages are speaking to any of these attitudes and values and motivations right now. So I think there's a big opportunity to consider if your brand has any sort of natural connection to any one of these attitudes, values, and motivations. It might be time to consider sort of emphasizing those a little more in terms of your brand strategy. So that's everything I have to talk about today, although I'm certainly going to answer any and all questions. But thank you. So if it works so early in the morning, we probably all have a beer right now. But let's talk about questions. All right. Can you still hear me? I'm looking at some of the comments. I wasn't able to see them during the actual presentation. But yeah, I'm sorry about the poor audio quality. I'm not sure what's going on. Hopefully you were able to pick up on a lot of that anyway. Yeah, storytelling is really powerful. Let's see here. Yeah, someone said it to my chagrin if I mentioned that we may brew a hard seltzer. The response is always excitement, and I feel there will always be a strong market for traditionally brewed beers. Both of those are quite true. All right. Since we have silence, Andrew, I'm just going to confirm that I'm still coming through.